Welcome to HBTV, an objectivist philosopher's take on many interesting subjects, provocative subjects, challenging subjects, subjects that will gore sacred cows. And today I'm goring a big one. The rich should give back to the community. The successful should get credit for giving back to the community. Wrong. Wrong. That's collectivism. As we'll see, it's more the other way around. If someone owes anything to someone, it's the poor, the 99% who owe gratitude to the rich, to the successful, big time. Why is this collectivism that you should give back to the community? Because there is no community. There's no collective community. There's only individual people. There's no community. There's no society. There's no nation. There's no mystical entity, the great we, floating in a cloud above actual people. They're only actual individual people interacting. Now, if you think about it that way, what is the meaning of someone who's successful should give back to the community? We're going to see that in a minute. The opposite of collectivism is individualism. And that's how I want to advocate you think about it. Individualism says only individuals are real. Only individuals exist. Society, community is the name for, it's an umbrella term for a whole lot of individuals who are the real entities living in a certain geographical area. Individualism says people interact with individuals. They don't interact with some collective entity called the community. An individualist says when a person is benefited by, quote, the community, that means he's benefited by individuals, a parent, a teacher, a buyer of his product. Individuals benefit you, benefit the successful, but on what terms? On the terms of trade, on the terms of value for value, to use Ayn Rand's phrase. When you interact with your mother as a child, she is not loaning you your clothes, your food, your education. She is giving you that because she loves you and because she took on an obligation to give you those things, not because she is placing you in her debt. She's in your debt because she created a dependent organism, that is, a person who cannot support his own life for many years. So it's not a case that you owe to your mother or to your father, unless they did something extraordinary. Even then, they did it because they love you. If they did it because they thought they had to, they didn't want to, then you should have contempt for that, not give something back to them. What's wrong with you that you didn't love me enough to want me to have these things, mother or daddy? So you see how, well, that's just one. Let's take the next one. Teacher. Teacher. You give back to your teachers? No. Your teachers were paid. They didn't say, I'm going to give you an education, but you'll owe me later in life because I'm doing this as a sacrifice and placing you in debt, even though you're now 5 years old and have no concept of what debt is. The relations between people should be voluntary to mutual benefit, and by and large, they are. A customer who buys your product, he's not buying it to give you charity. He's not buying it. Okay, I'm buying your product, but you're going to owe me for this. He's buying it because he wants to profit. It may not be a monetary profit. It may be that he wants the thing you're selling will give him more enjoyment, and he wants that more than the money he could spend on something else. So you have the product that's most enjoyable to him in the competition for those dollars. So he's benefiting just as you are. That's the nature of trade. Trade is not a gift. Trade is not a loan. Trade is the exchange of values for values to mutual benefit. And that's true even like in the parent example, where the one side of the trade is spiritual rather than material. Sometimes we give a material gift to someone, like on their birthday, as a way of celebrating their value to us. And there's a trade, there is value for value, but it isn't cash for material good. It's material good for spiritual good. And that's entirely proper and an important part of life. So you see how collectivism, talking about the community, society, fogs up the mind. It stops you from making real what's going on and makes you think, yeah, a person got a lot out of being in society, being in the community, so he should give back. He should recognize that debt. The community got a lot out of having you. They got as much from having you as you got from the community, and that's regardless of how rich or poor you are. If all the interactions you have with the people in your community are voluntary and self-interested, which they should be, then both sides win. In all proper relationships, any exchange is win-win. So it's not the case that one side then has to give back to the other. There's not anything to give back. You've already, all right, I gave it the office, so to speak. You've already paid for what you got from others, either materially or spiritually. Think of you didn't build that. You didn't build that, said, I believe it was Obama, because you didn't create the roads, the post office, the law system, all the other things around you. You were born in society which had achieved a certain level of prosperity, knowledge, government. So you didn't do anything. Well, that is a disgusting lie. The fact that you didn't invent the wheel doesn't mean if you invented the iPhone, you didn't invent something. To invent something, to build something, doesn't mean you build everything in the universe necessary to build that thing. It means you started with some materials that you owned and rightfully acquired, whether they're physical stuff like lumber and steel and rivets, or whether they're intellectual stuff like ideas that you learned in education. You start with certain things that you've rightfully acquired, and you take a new step. You make a new combination of them. You make something that didn't exist before, you build it. To build is not to create all the raw materials. It is to assemble. And people who work hard and achieve they were not given their product by the fact that there are roads or school system. Look at all the people who had the same general social framework and didn't create anything. You know, it's both Steve Jobs and I lived in the same society, but I didn't create anything. I mean, I created a lot of ideas, but I didn't create any products. What happened? So obviously there's some difference between what he did and what I did. So all proper human interactions are win-win. Well, otherwise you wouldn't engage in them. If you're in a relationship which is lose-lose, get out of it. Don't do it. Now, improper human relationships are lose-lose. There's really no win-lose. You can't win by making someone else lose. It can appear, like a bank robber is profiting, but he's really not. In the long run, he's destroying himself too. So it's either win-win or lose-lose. But even if you think of it as win-lose, you shouldn't be in a relationship where both parties are not winning, gaining from the relationship. And that applies to marriages and to contracts and to the stock market and everything. There are exploiters. There are exploiters who need to give something back, but they're not the Henry Fords and the Mark Zuckerbergs. They're the Bernies. Bernie Madoff and Bernie Sanders. The Bernies are exploiters, those two Bernies. Well, it's obvious that Bernie Madoff is an exploiter. He didn't engage in capitalism. He engaged in robbery, which is the opposite of capitalism. But Bernie Sanders is an exploiter. He didn't presumably get any of the many interventions in the economy for his own benefit. No, probably he did, but let's say he didn't. Let's say that he taxed some people or voted for taxes to take money from them to give to the poor, the needy. That's what he says he does anyway, and I take him at his word because that's worse. Why does the motive change whether it's exploitation or not? Robbery is robbery, whether you give the loot to the poor or keep it for yourself. The motive does not change force into freedom. Yeah, I tied you up, bound you, took your wallet, and spent the money. But I didn't spend it on myself. I spent it on this poor, starving person. That doesn't change what happened to you. You're exploited. So both Bernies are exploiters. In capitalism, under capitalism, it's a system. The definition of it, in effect, is it's a voluntary system. All human interactions occur voluntarily without force or fraud. It's characterized by the exchange of value to mutual benefit. Both parties gain. So there is no debt to discharge. There's nothing to give back because nothing was taken away unless you're a Bernie. No, this is not a blanket condemnation of everyone named Bernie. But in a sense, as I made the headline for this show, there is a certain sense in which someone should give back. I wouldn't say give back, but give. But the shoe is on the other foot. It's the community that should give back to the wealth creators. They should give back the taxes taken by force, and they should give, not give back, their gratitude and respect. Someone does owe something to somebody here. The man on the street owes something to the great wealth creators. Immense gratitude. Immense gratitude. But they did it just to profit. They did it for selfish reasons. Yes, and that's why they should be thanked. Thank you, Bill Gates, for loving what you do, having the courage to do it, and doing it so well. doing it so well that I and the whole world benefited from what you did. So my theme is that we in the 99% get far more benefit from the 1% than they do from us. We get more from them. We both gain, but we get more from them than they get from us. Because there's a pyramid of ability, to use Ayn Rand's terms. The people of greatest ability to create wealth and to create knowledge as a precondition of creating wealth benefit billions, everyone on the planet. The people who do a small job, if they do it well, benefit the people they immediately deal with, and that's it. For instance, Watson and Crick, John Watson and Francis Crick, who decoded DNA and proved that it was the basic unit of heredity and showed how it works. Compare them in terms of who benefits whom with the nurse who's vaccinating someone with a messenger RNA vaccine like Moderna or Pfizer. Now, the nurse vaccinating is giving you a benefit, and that's why you will pay for the administering of the shot. Actually, today you won't because of the wrong collectivist philosophy. But in a free society, you would pay for your vaccines, just like you pay for anything else. But she benefits the people that she inoculates, right? Watson and Crick, by discovering DNA, made that vaccine possible. They benefited everyone hugely, enormously. Everything we know about genetics and genomics, gene editing and replication of genes, nucleotide sequences standing for genes that control the development of the body. All of that comes from the work of Watson and Crick. So some little good comes from the nurse vaccinating, and some little good, some little benefit to the world comes from somebody who, let's say, just checks you in at the door of the vaccination place and asks to see your driver's license, probably less than the nurse. Anybody who gets paid on a free market for doing something is giving more value than they're giving value and you're receiving value. It's value for value. They're being paid because they contribute. But the people at the top of the intellectual pyramid contribute incalculably more than the people at the bottom. And it's not a moral pyramid. It's a pyramid of how much intellectual contribution it can make. And in that context, I want to read a quote from Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand's great novel. The hero says in a speech that he gives to the world, the man at the top of the intellectual pyramid contributes the most to all those below him, but gets nothing except his material payment, receiving no intellectual bonus from others to add to the value of his time. The man at the bottom, who left to himself would starve in his hopeless ineptitude, contributes nothing to those above him, but receives the bonus of all their brains. Such is the nature of the competition between the strong and the weak of the intellect. Such is the pattern of, quote, exploitation for which you have damned the strong. She goes on to explain that a little bit further, talking about how it works in a free, rational society. The material value of your work is determined not only by your effort, but by the effort of the best productive minds who exist in the world around you. When you work in a modern factory, you are paid not only for your labor, but for all the productive genius which has made that factory possible, for the work of the industrialist who built it, for the work of the investor who saved the money to risk on the untried and the new, for the work of the engineer who designed the machines of which you were pushing the levers, for the work of the inventor who created the product which you spend your time on making, for the work of the scientist who discovered the laws that went into the making of that product, for the work of the philosopher who taught men how to think, close quote. And that would be Aristotle that she's referring to there, who defined the laws of logic and did an amazingly complete job. So compare an inventor to a truck driver in terms of who owes what to whom. The truck driver provides a service. He gets goods from here to there. The inventor invents something, let's say the truck, that makes possible everyone delivering things by truck from here to there, from over there to over there, and so forth. So the inventor's wholesale. He's creating something that everyone can use, everyone in a certain line, in a certain development. And the scientist discovers knowledge that any inventor can use, that open up whole fields of invention, like gene editing from the discovery of Watson and Crick, or the space program from Isaac Newton's discoveries. Now, there's an objection here that you may have heard. Okay, Watson and Crick discovered DNA, but Rosalind Franklin was close on their heels, and if they didn't do it, she would have done it. If Christopher Columbus hadn't discovered America, somebody else would have. So don't go singing the praises of Watson and Crick or Christopher Columbus, because somebody else could have done what they have done. Eventually, as knowledge accumulated, sure, they would have done it. It would have happened anyway. Yeah, that's true of almost everything. It's not true of everything, but it's true of the vast majority of things. But then the person who did invent it, like Rosalind Franklin discovered, if she had beaten Watson Crick, then she would be in the position and I would be singing her praises. So it doesn't show that there aren't innovators who pull mankind forward. It just says that if it hadn't been innovator A, it would have been innovator B, and then we'd all be thanking them, or we should all be thanking them. What it doesn't show is what collectivism wants you to think. Well, if Watson and Crick hadn't discovered DNA, I'm sure that George Costanza on Seinfeld would have, or the guy running the 7-Eleven at your local service station, he would have done it. It's an anonymous social progress, the left says. No, the people at the bottom of the intellectual pyramid would not have made the discoveries of Einstein, Newton, Crick, or the inventions of Thomas Edison, or the marketing genius of Bill Gates. It would not have happened. And in a way, that's the theme of Atlas Shrugged.
Harry, can we pause for some questions?
Yeah. I only have a wrap up, so that's a good place to pause.
Okay, so something you mentioned about why we're thanking someone. So you said something like, thank you, Bill Gates, because you pursued your values and you did it in a way, and we all became better off. So for me, there's something that always confuses me here. For which of the two parts are we thanking him? Because, for example, if Bill Gates was a productive genius, but also he was a hermit and he was in a hut in the mountains, he would have done the same thing when it comes to his ability. He might not want to share it to the world for whatever reasons.
Right.
Would we still then say thank you, or the thank you refers to the value that we have taken from him?
Well, it's both, but if he did not share, did not try to profit from the work of others by trading with them, we wouldn't know about him, and it would be of much less value to us. So we're admiring. Let's take somebody. Suppose it's discovered that in the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, in 900 AD, a little-known philosopher came up with a rational theory of concepts, which he was afraid to publish because the church would have persecuted him. Came up with a more pro this world philosophy, but he just kept it to himself. But now, fragments of manuscripts are unearthed. You would admire that, and you would say, well, good for him. I'm sorry we couldn't benefit from it. It took more centuries before someone had the courage, namely Thomas Aquinas, to do that kind of work. But you would admire it, or if someone does beautiful paintings but doesn't show them to anyone. If you saw those paintings so that you knew about it, you would be knocked out by his skill. You would be sorry that he kept them hidden. So it's both. Because you loved your work and were good at it, we benefited. Both parts of it are good. Making it and marketing it are both things to be grateful for.
Okay. And one more question I have. So when you were saying that you didn't build it, it came to my mind one line from Atlas Shrugged, which I'm going to read it very quickly. It's when James Taggart is pissed off with the John Gall line, and he finds poor Cheryl and he outpours his evilness to her, and he says, Reardon, he didn't invent smelting and chemistry and air compression. He couldn't have invented his metal, but for thousands and thousands of other people. His metal. Why does he think it's his? Why does he think it's his invention? Everybody used the work of everybody else. Nobody ever invents anything. And then poor Cheryl says, but the iron ore and all those other things were there all the time. Why didn't anybody else make the metal but Mr. Reardon? And then Taggart says he didn't do it for any noble purpose. He just did it for his own profit. So the question here is, obviously Rand portrays this because he sees something in it. So the question is, what is the psychology of the person who says you didn't build this? Is it the person who is incapable of reaching such an achievement? Is it the person who has an eye on this achievement because they want to make the producer succumb to their view, to their power? A combination of two. And what do you think is the driving force of this malice?
Okay, there's two parts of that: the driving force and the popularity of it. I think the popularity of it is what objectivism called social metaphysics, meaning conformity, taking your view of what's real from what other people say is real. Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that deals with what is real and what is not, what is the nature of existence. So social metaphysics means you live in a world of people, you have no concept of facts, and if people say it, you believe it. So that's why most people would echo, you didn't build that, and would latch on to the thin rationalization offered. But the people who launch these campaigns and really seethe with resentment and want to tear down those who are proud of having achieved something, they are burning with what used to be called an inferiority complex. They feel bad about themselves and they can't stand seeing someone who's happy and productive and achieving things and proud. So it's nihilism, it's what the French call ressentiment, a low for, Ayn Rand called it hatred of the good for being the good.
But if you're Obama, you have achieved objectively things. So why would you feel this complex towards other achievers?
Oh, it doesn't have to do. First of all, I don't think Obama achieved anything, but it doesn't have to do. There can be people who have achieved something who feel that. What you feel is not determined by the facts, it's determined by your evaluation of the facts. So, for instance, look at Bill Gates. I mentioned him before. He retired from Microsoft and wants his money used for, quote, charitable things, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I think he has $50 billion to fund it. Mostly his. He gave half his wealth to that. Why did he do that? He's achieved great things, but it wasn't enough because he's accepted the morality of self-sacrifice. So he thinks that, well, just helping people in their lives, that's not noble. But if I get better plumbing to the Ugandans, that really is noble. Now, I will say in his defense that a lot of the things that he chose to fund are the better kind of things that in principle could be, well done if funded. But it's clear that if he had not bought into the morality of altruism, he would think, I want my money invested. Not only is that good for me, but that does the most good for mankind. The best thing that he could do for me and you and everyone else would be to turn those funds over to the most profitable high-tech. He should become an investor. He should become a shark, like on Shark Tank, which is a show I highly recommend. He should be making that money productive, not funding things as an act of charity. So, he's a great achiever, but he feels guilty. Look at all the foundations, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, the Ford Foundation. All these people felt guilty or incomplete because they hadn't, quote, given back to the community. Why did they think in those terms? Because of the Christian religion. That was the show last week, right? Leftist Bible thumpers. It's the Christian ethics of you get no credit for benefiting people if you get something out of it. You only get credit if you sacrifice yourself for others. So that's my answer there. It's not the facts, it's your evaluation of the facts.
Thank you. So let's go to some super chats from the audience, and then we go to your wrap up, and then we go to more questions from the audience. So Kmetia says kind words from me and you. Thank you very much, Kmetia, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Super chat from Michael. Does the mixed economy prove humanity can go pretty far on partially correct ideas?
Oh, yes. Yes, it does. We are riding the momentum of the 19th century. And there's a little known fact, maybe known is not the right word, a little trumpeted fact, circulated fact that knowledge, it grows exponentially. Knowledge grows exponentially. For instance, if you didn't know how to read and write, it would be tremendously difficult to invent something like a better plow. Thomas Jefferson invented a better plow. Do you know how he did it? He used calculus, which was then a new tool invented by Newton and independently by Leibniz. So Thomas Jefferson could apply the knowledge that Newton and Leibniz, I think he must have got it from Newton, had developed on calculus. He used that to solve a certain minimum maximum problem in the shape of the plow. And he maximized the plowing force of a plow and improved every farmer's life who picked up on that. So that was possible because of Newton. And now, because of Watson and Crick, we've got a whole explosion of biological knowledge. And because of the discoveries of Faraday and the Shockley who invented the transistors, of all these things that were invented and discovered, make it easier to discover the next thing. So, for instance, just give you one concrete, it should be clear though. The Moderna vaccine for the virus, how long did it take to invent that? 2 days. 2 days. Because they were given the nucleotide sequence of the DNA and gene reading now, polymerase chain reaction and so forth, where you can see the effects of making changes in the genes. All this is known, so it only took 2 days to make the Moderna virus and vaccine. I always get those mixed up. And all the rest of the time was due to government not allowing it to be put on the market. So knowledge makes the next knowledge easier. So there's an exponential curve for progress. The welfare state drains as much as it can out of that, but because it's an exponential curve, there's still an explosion of goods and services. It's incredible, really. I think this is the answer to why there hasn't been more price inflation, given all the monetary expansion. Technology has exploded because knowledge builds on knowledge. So there's many more goods produced than would have been the case at a lower level in history. The growth rate has been so high that the crimes of the welfare state have not overtaken it. It's hampered it. There's an interesting book I'm reading called Where's My Flying Car? Where's My Flying Car? Back in the 50s, when I grew up, flying cars were supposed to be here in a couple of decades. They're still not here. Why? Because of government controls, regulations, taxes, interventions in the economy have slowed down the rate of progress, but it's still progressing. And because the progress is exponential, it still tends to get, creators have been creating faster than the looters can seize it. But we'd be in a utopia if they hadn't seized any of it. Now, I'm not sure I got everything in that you wanted there, Nikos.
There are more questions, super chats from our friend Michael, so I'll proceed. By the way, let me pitch that the place where I heard that Moderna created the vaccine in 2 days was HBL, the Harry Binswanger letter. So I encourage people to join. You can see Harry in action, philosophy in action, and Harry, your takes on the pandemic from the beginning was a breath of fresh air. So Raz, if you can put in the super chat the link for HBL. So Michael says, it's unfair to say why didn't he pay for his own health insurance when government regulations have artificially raised the costs of health insurance. If we lived in a truly free market, I would agree with you, but that is not our context. Not sure if this is a reply to Harry, it's probably a reply to people who say, but these people didn't pay for their self-insurance. Another question. Isn't it more important to deregulate the economy before we get rid of the welfare state? If we phase out the welfare state before removing government controls, there won't be enough job creation to sustain the population.
Right. That's a good point that I hadn't myself thought of, but as soon as he stated it, I leaped to agree that you can't successfully get rid of a lot of welfare if the economy is tied hand and foot. The economy has to be flexible enough, agile enough to, for instance, absorb the previously unemployed workers who were on welfare. Now, in a free economy, for instance, here's a regulation I oppose is all immigration controls. I want open immigration. And the population would surge. Now, that would mean that the labor market would be swelling, and more supply means price goes down. Now, if you didn't have regulation, that would be no problem because prices would fall, wage rates would fall, and prices would fall, and all the extra workers, as long as they didn't consume more than they produced, would be adding to the general output. They'd be producing at least as much as they're taking out, and they would be hired because they're really producing more than they're taking out. So it would be good. There'd be no problem. And I've seen this demonstrated by simple arithmetic, that you could double the population of workers and everyone would be better off, including the workers. But that requires that wage rates are free to fall, nominal wage rates. So for instance, if $1 billion is being spent to employ the population, and now there's twice the population, nominal wage rates have to fall in half. You still spend the same 1 billion, but now you hire twice as many because the nominal in dollar wage rate is falling. But that's not a bad thing, because prices would be falling in half too, or more than in half. But in today's world, there's too much regulation for wage rates to fall. You can't lower wage rates. When did the last time you ever heard of wage rates? I'm talking about all wage rates, average wage rate. Ever heard of them going down? I've never heard it my whole life.
Only in Greece during the darkest moments of the 2010, 2015 crisis.
Yeah, and I guess Wall Street workers had their salaries cut, but not, laborers. I don't know in Greece, but basically there are a lot of laws to, quote, protect workers from supply and demand, and supply and demand is what makes the market clear. So it's a good point. You need to deregulate. There's more I could say about why ending welfare would still work to everyone's benefit, but I think that the point is better made the way your questioner made it.
And we have a whole debate tomorrow with Yaron Brook, with a proponent of the welfare state. So stay tuned, people. 7 p.m. tomorrow, UK time. So Shadow Blade, we're going to get to your super chat straight after Harry sums up his views on the topic. And then we're going to have the last 10 minutes or so on questions of general interest beyond the confounds of this topic. So Harry.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that the high earners, the 1%, the giants of productivity, should be thanked and publicly honored because we are in their debt. It's up to us to discharge our debt by saying thank you, at least. And I have a modest proposal that could go beyond that. My proposal is anyone who earns $1 million or more a year should be exempt from all income taxes. Yes, it's too little of a recognition for them. They should get more, but the real issue is not financial, but moral. And by exempting them from income tax, we're saying, you did a great service for us. You have helped us enough so that we don't want you to have to pay taxes after you gave us the iPhone or Windows or Amazon or whatever it is. That is so helpful to us. It's indecent to consider taxing you at all. And to augment the tax exemption of these people, there should be an annual public ceremony where the year's top 10 earners should be awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. Imagine the effects of that on young people. Imagine that the kind of fame and adulation that bathes gangsta rappers or the Kardashians attached it to the more rational achievements of Jeff Bezos, let's say. Or if the moral praise showered on Mother Teresa went to someone like Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase or Lloyd Blankfein and David Solomon of Goldman Sachs. That would be a capitalist and proper society. Instead, we live in a culture where a few years back in the New Yorker, there was an article written that smeared Goldman Sachs as, quote, a great vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity, close quote. That's for the sin of successful investing, which means for channeling savings to their most productive uses, the uses that produce the most things that people want to buy, instead of wasting them on government boondoggles, Solyndra, bridges to nowhere, and all the rest. Incidentally, there is a great vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity. It's the Internal Revenue Service, and the equivalent in every other country. At a deeper level, the vampire squid is the monstrous perversion of justice that makes the IRS possible, an envy-ridden moral code that damns success, damns profit, and damns earning money in voluntary exchange. An end must be put to the practice of draining the productive to subsidize the unproductive. An end must be put to the primitive, barbaric notion of giving back to the community, that you belong to the tribe. An end must be put to the outrageous injustice of demanding that the superlative wealth creators do penance for the sin of creating value. It's an end to the altruist collectivist philosophy. And Ayn Rand is just the lady who can do it. Thank you. Nikos, are there more questions?
Yes, of course. And you mentioned there is no society, and in this country where I live, in the UK, the most successful and beneficial for the population, in my view, Prime Minister, has always been vilified for claiming that there is no society, there are only individuals. And she said this within an altruistic frame, that society cannot help the poor, individual people can help the poor. And she's vilified. So if you ask most people, tell me one thing that proves that Thatcher is a bad person, they will say, oh, Thatcher said there is no society. Anyway.
Wow. See, in America, that attack wouldn't fly, I don't think. We're still too individualists in our DNA, so to speak, for that to gain traction here.
So, super chat from the Shadow Blades. Off topic or a topic for another time? No, for today. So, how to mentally get rid of altruism or remaining hidden premises so you can be more selfish and happy. So I assume, Harry, this means within the context of one's life rather than generally in the culture.
Yeah. Well, my wife specializes in that, and her name is Jean Maroney Binswanger, and you can see her website at thinkingdirections.com. That's thinking, like the process, the mental process, thinkingdirections.com. The basic answer is two levels and three tenses. And this was an answer given by Ayn Rand, but it's very abstract. You have to understand the case for selfishness, both in the abstract, on that level, the theory of why it's right and why altruism is wrong, and in the concrete, why any given, on that level, that's the second level, any given case where you're tempted to sacrifice for someone else, trace through what that means. People don't do that. It's like a fog that gathers to cloud up what's going to happen if you refuse to live for yourself. It is bad. Bad things are going to happen. You can figure that out. Then the three tenses are past, present, and future. You need to see how you develop the altruist philosophy, that is what put it into your soul, and usually it's early childhood conclusions. You need to see it how it's operating now by monitoring your mental functioning to see how certain concepts automatically come. You don't feel guilty about it because it's automatized, it's a habit. To see that habit mentally operating now. And the third is to think about the future, about what your selfish immediate future and long-range future would be and what the alternatives were. So it's thinking that you have to do. It's not any magic pill. It's awareness on 2 levels and 3 tenses.
Thank you, Harry. So another perk of being a member of the Ayn Rand Center UK, beyond the fact that you support these types of programs, which I have to say, though, are also supported by the Ayn Rand Institute. So a big thank you to the Ayn Rand Institute, a big thank to Tal, who believes in this project. But another perk of being a member of ARC UK is you can send questions for Harry in advance before the episode. And whenever we have time in an episode, we're going to ask these questions. So today's questions are a bit too specific, and they are on maths. So someone asks, he's very happy that you're working on a book about the philosophy of maths. So his questions are, and I have no idea what they mean. Is Cantor's diagonal method of proof legitimate? That's the first question. And the second question, how does Gödel's incompleteness theorem apply to objectivism and scientific systems? So if you can simplify it a bit also for the rest of our audience, otherwise just
briefly, let's see how briefly I can answer that. I can be pretty brief about Cantor's diagonalization argument because I don't know for sure. I think it arises in a wrong context, which is that the real, so-called real numbers have an actually infinite number of decimal places going to infinity. That's what makes a diagonalization argument possible, I think. I know an objectivist mathematician who thinks it is valid and it doesn't depend upon that. But I think in the my tentative preliminary understanding, let's say I'm very suspicious of it. The conclusion it reaches, I don't think is pernicious. What's pernicious and wrong is the concept of infinity. I do not use that concept. I do not believe that one should use it. There are other concepts that name exactly what that names in an inexact mystical way. Ayn Rand had this concept of open-endedness. And she said the number series and many other things are not actually infinite, but they are open-ended. That is, they can be extended as the need arises. But that doesn't mean they automatically extend into infinity, which is a contradiction in terms, if you look at the meaning of infinity. So I think Cantor is understood as the founder of transfinite numbers, higher order infinities, and I don't even accept the first order infinity. But there is probably a phenomenon there which, if conceptualized correctly, would be valuable, but it's conceptualized wrong. And the second one was Gödel. Now there I have a more interesting view. Let's see how I can make it intelligible. Gödel's theorem holds that if a logical system is complete, that is, that it can prove everything we know to be true, it's got to have a contradiction in it. On the other hand, if it doesn't have any contradiction, so it's internally consistent, there will always be things that it cannot prove. Now, what's not well understood, to put it mildly, is that Gödel, I think himself, and certainly I view this as a reductio ad absurdum of Bertrand Russell's logic, because the logic that he's talking about, and it's even in his paper, the title of his paper, is Bertrand Russell's symbolic logic. And in that logic, there's no meaning to the symbols. And everything that's a, quote, well-formed formula, that is a string of symbols that fits the rules you've set up, is valid. And then you work out what other symbols are proper moves, as they put it, in the game from those symbols, which are arbitrary. And under those assumptions, there will be paradoxes. And Gödel's example, the whole thing is built on this. This statement I am now uttering is not provable in Bertrand Russell's logic. He doesn't add in Bertrand Russell's logic, he says in L, where L is a language in question, and that's Bertrand Russell's logic. So it's a paradoxical statement that commits a fallacy of pure self-reference, as I call it. And whether Gödel, some people think Gödel realized this, but it's the refutation of the idea that you can do logic without looking at the meaning of the terms. Because if you get beyond, well, that's a grammatical, allowed, well-formed formula, you have the same paradoxes in the statement I'm now uttering is false. Or for that matter, the statement I'm now uttering is true. There is no statement. It's a grammatical sentence, but nothing is being said. The statement I'm now uttering is true. What statement? The statement that the statement I'm now uttering is true. What statement is that? The statement that the statement that the statement I'm now uttering is true, is true, is true. So it's an infinite regress that never says anything. And I, in my book, How We Know, discuss these paradoxes at length. So I think Gödel's theorem has no actual significance for mathematics or logic. It's kind of an maybe unintentional refutation of formalistic logic, logic that dispenses with meaning and just looks at symbols as marks on paper manipulated according to arbitrary rules. That's not logic, and that does land you in contradictions.
Thank you very much, Harry, and thanks, Michael, for the question. So also a big thanks to Mario-Lyn, to Christopher, to Jonathan, and to Jeff for your super chats. We really appreciate it, and thank you very much. So we're back next week with Harry to slay more dragons of allowable opinion, which is not correct. Let me say, if you want to watch previous episodes, if you go to the Ayn Rand Center UK YouTube channel, you're going to find a whole playlist with Harry's episode. But also, I would encourage you to follow Ayn Rand Institute's global Facebook and Twitter page, where I post highlights from the most exciting moment, the most highlightable moments, short videos with subtitles from Harry. We have one last minute question.
I'd like to say something to those people who have not had any prior exposure to Ayn Rand and objectivism. You have never heard anything like what you heard here today. If you think about it, you have read probably lots of commentary, lots of op-eds, lots of philosophers' statements. Have you ever heard anything that proceeded as logically and clearly and said things you'd never heard before and went as deep as we went here today? I don't think so. And that should be an advertisement. It's not my genius, it's Ayn Rand's. I learned an incredible amount, virtually everything. I didn't build that. She built it. I just decorated it. So I urge you to read Atlas Shrugged. Don't try to read the nonfiction first when there is the world's greatest novel in literature waiting for you to have the thrill of reading it, Atlas Shrugged or The Fountainhead.
So we have one stoppage time super chat. You can address it quickly. Why did Ayn Rand consider Kant to be evil for his epistemology? What's wrong with holding the primacy of consciousness if in the end we have science?
You can't have science. with the primacy of consciousness. Primacy of consciousness says you don't know anything. All you've got is deluded appearances. Yeah, everybody else has the same deluded appearances. That held up for about 50 years. And now we've got woke culture, which is there is no facts. There are no facts. There is no truth. There's only my truth, your truth, or black truth, or white truth. The author of that is Kant. I talked earlier about social metaphysics. Kant is the legitimatizer of social metaphysics. He says cognition is social. There is no standard. There is no science. There's no fact. There's only shared practices.
Right. So I'm sure we're going to have a chance, friend Azad, who asked the chat. Thank you for the super chat. I'm sure we're going to get back to Kant at some point. For many people, it's a hard pill to swallow. How can you say that Kant is the most evil person in history when we had murderers and all that stuff? But I'm sure at some point we're gonna get to that.
Yes, and that is it involves the understanding of principles, but that's not like the number one thing that we need to get clear on. How evil was Kant? Was he just very bad, or was he horrendously, gigantically bad?
Maybe I guess it comes down to, do we blame the philosopher or do we blame the thugs, the NKVD or the SS thugs who, but we can discuss this at some other.
We blame both. When you hire a hitman, when the mafia hires a hitman, the mafia don, the hitman is convicted and so is the mafia don, if it can be proved. You're both guilty. And Kant is the great mafia don of them all.
And that's a highlight moment for a video of its own. So thank you very much, Harry. And we're going to be back next week. We don't know the topic yet, but we're going to come up with something exciting. And thank you very much for taking the time and for your energy and the value you give to the audience. So
thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.